Hey guys, it's Rose. This video isn't really about any specific books. Instead, I wanted to talk a little bit about buddy reading. And unsurprisingly, this has been inspired by the buddy book-thon project extravaganza going on BookTube right now, which, for the record, I think is really awesome. I think it's fun. I'm loving watching people read together, and generally it kind of gives me the warm fuzzies. However, it also makes me a teensy bit sad because I'm going to be honest and say that I find buddy reading really, really challenging, and I thought it might be fun to talk about why. Buddy reading, for those people who don't know, is essentially when you read a book alongside someone else or several someone else's. So either you are reading a book at the same time as a friend, or you're part of a book club or book discussion on Goodreads or in real life, or anywhere else, obviously. The idea behind this is that you get to have someone to share that roller coaster ride with, speculate about what's coming next maybe, talk about incredible moments in the book, and generally just kind of nerd out. And it's really awesome. A lot of book readers are also very introverted. These things go very well together. So it's a lot of fun to find someone who you're comfortable sitting down and really getting into a book about, because as much as I love being entirely on my own, I also do really, really enjoy being able to talk to someone about the books that I love, because that's why I do this. Obviously. While it's a great idea, there are a couple of issues that I have with it, mostly to do with the fact that I am both luckily and very unluckily a speed reader. This isn't something that I trained myself to do. This isn't something I'm not one of those people who actively learned how to read faster or who skim reads in order to get through books at a greater rate. It just so happens that I learned how to read at a very young age. I've always loved it, and somehow practice makes perfect. I've ended up getting to a point where I just whip through books. In some ways, this is awesome. When it comes to buddy reading, it sucks. First up, it's really hard finding someone who reads at the same pace that I do. I feel like that would be difficult for anyone, though, whether you're a speed reader or you're a slow reader or wherever you fall on that spectrum. Finding someone to buddy read with who is going to read things at the same pace so that you can sort of call them up or sit down with them and say, oh my God, this just happened. How do you feel about it? Do you think that so-and-so is going to get together with so-and-so? Whatever your particular speculation is. How do you do that? How do you find someone who you can have that discussion with who's reading at the same pace as you? This blows my mind. It absolutely blows my mind. I've attempted to do reading groups on Goodreads where you pick a book and then you end up having little threads for, the first 10 chapters, the next 10, the next 10. But I can't limit myself to just reading those 10 and then waiting for people to sort of catch up and discuss it for a bit and then reading the next. If it's a good book, I'm going to read that book in a day, maybe 2 or 3. And if it's a bad book, I don't want to talk about it. So just pacing that out for me is a huge issue when it comes to buddy reading. A solution to that problem, obviously, is just to talk about books once you've finished them, because then you're not worrying about someone catching up. And this is what book clubs in real life do, obviously, is that you meet up once a month or whatever, and during that month, everyone has read this book, and then you discuss it at the end. That is a concept that makes far more sense to me because of pacing. But then I have to somehow, I have a terrible memory, so then I have to somehow time my reading so that I've just finished it maybe the day before the book club. Because if I read it at the beginning of the month and I have the club at the end of the month, by the end, I'm going to have forgotten the book. Obviously, this isn't the case with every book. If a book is really phenomenal, then I'll be able to discuss it with you in depth 10 years after reading it. But it's rare to find a book that's that good. Far more commonly, I'll read a book that's and I'll remember the general plot and concept, but sort of discussing the finer points of the book is only possible when it's very fresh in my mind. So again, we have a timing issue where either it's been a little too long or I'm struggling to finish it the night before, which sucks because you never, even for a speed reader, you never want to feel like you're pushing. You know, you never want to feel like you're racing through it and you're not appreciating it properly. Then, of course, we have an issue that has nothing to do with pacing and everything to do with finding people who want to read the books that you read at the time that you want to read them and who haven't already read them. This seems like it would be a lot easier than it is because there are so many books out there and no one's read them all, and you should be able to find something that's new that you both want to read. The issue with that is that in practice, it's a lot harder than you might think, and it happens, we all know that this happens, you pick up a book that you think you want to read, you're really interested in, but you just can't get into it, and you want to put it down and just deal with it later. You can't do that if you're meant to be buddy reading it with someone. You're committed to read that book. It's like when you're reviewing books, you can't say you're going to review it, take it, and then ignore it, put it aside, and not read it for 8 months. I mean, you physically can, but it's a dick move. You don't do it. And something about that concept doesn't sit too well with me. I don't like the idea of forced reading. I talked about this a little bit in my last video about having a giant TBR pile. I don't like the idea of feeling forced to read a book at a specific time unless I'm reviewing it or doing editing or otherwise working on that book. If I'm just reading for pure pleasure, I don't want to read something that isn't grabbing me, that isn't making me happy, because that's the point of pleasure reading. It should be pleasurable. Finally, the last reason that I have an issue with buddy reading is a bit of a personal one, and it's quite an emotional one. Essentially, buddy reading, even in theory, would only work for me for medium average books, because if a book is not very good, I don't really want to waste time discussing it, partially because I don't want to talk about really negative things all the time. This video doesn't really work with that, but I hope it's not too negative. What? But I don't want to talk about a book that I think sucks. It's just not something I'm into. And if a book is on the other end absolutely incredible, there's that little part of me that kind of doesn't want to pick it apart. I just want to like sit with it and get that nice little feeling of having a wonderful book that you've just read and being immersed in it. And you kind of want to protect it and love it inside your soul a little. Does that make sense? I hope it does. But I don't want to rip it apart. If I've really, really emotionally connected with a novel, I don't want to sit down and tear it to pieces with a group. I also don't really like doing that in a classroom setting. If you have a book that you absolutely adore, I think there's almost nothing worse to do with it than to tear it to pieces in terms of style and composition and characterization and everything else, because it just feels impersonal and kind of mean. Which means that if you're going to do a buddy read, it's got to be with a book that falls in that very average category. But why would you intentionally read books that you think are going to be average? What? So those are my issues with buddy reading, and I hope that this video doesn't come across as me putting down buddy reading. It's actually more of a little bit of sadness and frustration on my part, because I see this thing that seems like it's so fun and so wonderful and amazing, and I just have some practical problems when it comes down to doing it myself, and that actually makes me a little bit sad. So maybe this is more of an advice video in asking for it, not in giving it, obviously. If you are a big buddy reader, if you're really good with it, if you have a book club, or if you're a member of like Goodreads book groups, or if you're doing a BookTube buddy bookathon thing, then I would love your advice. I would love to know how you balance out some of these issues that I've just talked about. Maybe you just happen to read at a very sort of normal pace and that makes it easier. Maybe you have a really great memory, and so you can talk about books that you read a month ago in great detail. Or maybe you just have no problem. Maybe you want to rip a book apart if it was bad, or maybe you get great joy from going really, really, really into detail with a book if you loved it. But tell me, because I want to know, and because part of me really wishes that I could do some kind of buddy reading thing, because obviously, I do love talking about books, and when you find someone that you can really connect with and talk about a great read with, then it's a wonderful feeling. It's so satisfying, and I would love to be able to partake in that a little more, but I find it kind of hard. So buddy readers, I would love your opinions. I would love your advice. I would love your comments on some of the things that I've said. And if you are doing a buddy read this month and you're going to do a video about it, please add your link to that video as well. I would love to watch those. I think that they're really, really fun videos, and I love the idea. If you aren't taking part, tell me why. And I hope you have a wonderful read, whether you are doing it alone or with 100 friends. Bye.